Assalamualaikum, how are you? I hope you all are fine and good. Today I'm going to discuss about The Mill on the Floss, Part 1, Boy and Girl. So first of all, we take a look on the title significance of Part 1, Boy and Girl. So basically the boy and girl represents the two major characters of this novel, Maggie Tulliver and Tom Tulliver. Maggie Tulliver, the protagonist of this novel, and the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver, and her brother Tom Tulliver. So first part consists of 13 chapters, and each chapter has its own significance and importance to unfold the story and actions in the novel. So the part 1 begins with the description of Dorlcote Mill owned by Mr. Tulliver. Here the unnamed narrator narrates about the countryside area St. Oaks where the mill is located nearby the Floss. So basically he narrates about the fields, bridge, stones, and other small details. It creates the image of Garden of Eden basically for him, and there were two children playing along with their pet dog. Yeah, basically the two children were Tom and Maggie Tulliver. Uh, Here the writer shows the element of the positivity, nature, innocence, beauty, and implements the strong relationship between a brother and sister. So the initial chapters is the main concern about Tom's future orientation. Basically, Mr. Tulliver seeks an advice from Mr. Riley about Tom's schooling and education, and he points about the King Lawston School in London, and also figures about the Maggie's intellectual abilities. So he says that Mr. Tulliver, basically have to show the balance in between his two kids. So on the very first notion, he just focus about Tom's education and neglects the Maggie's passion towards reading and writing. So here we can find out the very important theme of this novel, knowledge versus ignorance. And we have the very important another theme of this novel is women's role attached to the society, because Maggie had no opportunity to go to school and have a proper education. So on the other hand, we have the Tom's character who was dull and lazy, and Maggie who was very intellectual, creative, and shows the interest towards education. So basically, the initial chapters were concerned about the contrast and comparison between these two characters, boy and girl, Tom and Maggie. And so the next few chapters were deal with the Maggie's life, how some incidents were influential to develop a child's behavior, we can say the dominant personality, and how they will affect her childhood as well as her adulthood. The incident of Maggie's neglection towards the feed of rabbit, and unfortunately the rabbits of Tom would die due to starve. And when Tom comes home for his holidays from the school, he figures about his rabbit's death, and there we have the rift between the very two characters, and the first, we can say, the step to breakage of the bond between brother and sister. Here we have the very incident before the dinner party where Tom and Maggie both were involved in the incident, cutting down the Maggie's hair, nest-like hairs. Basically, she got very bad remarks about her appearance from her aunts, Mrs. Glegg and Mrs. Pullet, all over the time, and contrast with her cousin sister Lucy Dean, because she was look beautiful, fair, and had a very clean image towards her aunts. And in especially the character of Maggie was contrast most of the times in the novel with Lucy Dean. And we have the character where Maggie was a dark, dull, complex girl having the black nest-like hair. So here we can say that she shows the rejection in the sort of cutting down her hairs with the help of her brother. And when the guest came, Mrs. Tulliver got embarrassed in front of all guests, and Mr. Tulliver also got furious about this incident. So the dinner party narrates the incident where Mrs. Glegg, Mrs. Pullett, Mrs. Dean, along with Mrs. Moss, were invited to celebrate the Easter Eve at Tulliver's house. So Mrs. Glegg pointed about the loan of £500 given to Mr. Tulliver, and Mr. Tulliver got furious about how she was acted in front of all guests basically. And Mrs. Pullett uh, just claimed Maggie's dark complexion compared to Gypsy, and Maggie also fantasized her appearance as a queen of gypsies because she thinks it was a very notion of admiring. So in real, gypsies were basically robbers and lived in tents along the Floss side. And in the next chapters, we can see that Maggie cast away towards these tents and find about the reality about the word gypsy basically. So we have the very other incident where the Maggie shows the very unusual behavior towards Lucy Dean, and she cast away from her home. And before that incident, we have the incident where Mr. Wickham appeared for the first time in this novel, the basically antagonist of this novel. Mr. Wickham was the lawyer of the Tulliver's neighbor who wanted to construct a dam at the Floss, and Mr. Tulliver denied that thing and filed the lawsuit against this thing. And unfortunately, he lost this lawsuit and became the enemy of Mr. Wickham. So basically, there is a rift between the two persons in this incident, and this is the main falling action of the novel. By the incident of Mr. Wickham and Mr. Tulliver's rift, we can find out about the another theme of this novel is tolerance versus forgiveness. And the very previous moments we have the same thing between the Tom and Maggie's rift for the first time. Here we can say that how the characters were so unfortunate to forgive or tolerate such very moments in their life. Here we have another incident where Mrs. Glegg seeks the return of her loan given to Mr. Tulliver, and Mr. Tulliver finds about the extension in the date of their return to loan, and Mr. Spullet manipulates that thing, and in the ego, Mr. Tulliver wrote a letter to Mrs. Glegg. As soon as possible, he returned their loan and he seeks help from his enemy, Mr. Wickham, to repay his loan, basically. Here we can say that the Mrs. Glegg is the element of materialistic approach of that society, how she was concerned about her luxurious status and the basic she neglects about the relationship of her sister and just cares about the money and status or just the luxurious items she have. The very incident of Maggie's unusual behavior while visiting Mrs. Pullet's house. They were playing in the garden and unconsciously Tom pushed Lucy Dean in towards the mud pond and he just ran off from that place. And suddenly the maid showed up there and misinterpreted all incident in front of Mrs. Pullet and Mrs. Tulliver. and they both blamed Maggie for the very notion. And Maggie just ran off from that place towards the Gypsy Valley. So the very incident of the um, Gypsy's Valley, where she find about the reality, the truth regarding to her fantasy queen of Gypsy. Basically, she was admiring herself as a queen of Gypsies. So this was the remark, basically the insulting remark by Mrs. Bullet. So she figures about that thing, and she uh, experienced the uncivilized, filthy, and all these unusual behaviors and customs of the very tribe. So she also runs away from that place, and while returning to home, she was rescued by her father, Mr. Tulliver. ऑल ओवर जो हमने पार्ट वन बॉय एंड गर्ल में देखा है कि मैगी टोलीवर का जो करेक्टर है वो किस तरह यानी कि कंपेयर एंड कंट्रास्ट किया जाता है उसके ब्रदर टॉम टोलीवर के साथ एंड अलॉन्ग विद हर कज़न सिस्टर लूसी भी, और किस तरह यानी कि जो इंसिडेंट्स हैं वो हमारी या किसी भी इंडिविजुअल की जो एक पर्सनैलिटी डेवलपमेंट होता है टाइम पीरियड उसको वो इफ़ेक्ट करता है, और किस तरह से ये चीज़ जो है आने वाले टाइम में हमें यानी कि नुकसान पहुंचा सकती है। और इसमें हमने देखा है कि अलग अलग जो करेक्टर्स हैं, बेसिकली मिसेस ब्लैक हो गया, मिसेस जो पुलेट है, या मिस्टर विकम जो एंटेगनिस्ट ऑफ दिस नॉवल है बेसिकली। तो हर एक करेक्टर की अपनी अपनी एक इनकी सिग्निफिकेंस है टू अनफोल्ड द स्टोरी। So the main essence of the part one is about the strong relationship between the boy and girl Tom and Maggie, how the factors affected their relationship, and the end of part one we can see through the distorted and the rifts between the different characters. So I hope this video will help you to understand the Mill on the Floss part one boy and girl.